our governess. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Let's see here. Has been an interesting day. Just woke up. I see my inboxes are full, so I'll have a lot of work to do when we're done with this live. Hopefully, that means that we're closer to having a couple new generational wealth trust funds set up with our 100 new families goal this year. But we'll see. You caught that, huh? Yeah, it's okay. But the governess like turned into a master barista while she was here. So she used to make that first cup of coffee, and it was amazing. I cannot replicate that skill. Let's see. I think there's a new government is arriving tomorrow, so we'll see how that works out. But I digress. Let's see. Let me take a look at my notes here. What are we supposed to be talking about? Breaking the cycle. How to be the first in your family to build a legacy structure. All right. Nothing wrong with that. We get a ton of those. This side of the business is definitely the most rewarding side of the business from my point of view, which is probably why we leaned into it for 2026. And we do get a ton of like, I'm breaking the mold. I'm the first person in my family who's going to have generational wealth. I'm the first person who's going to be thinking about my kids more than myself, so on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we do run into a whole lot of first timers, which is awesome. Probably the most rewarding situation is to see that, especially some of the stories we get. You know, orphans and people who are left in gas stations or fire stations rather at birth, and like people who are just done crazy wrong from the first moments of their life, and then they're creating a plan to make sure that that doesn't happen again in their family. Really inspirational stories actually. All right, let's see here. Hmm. Okay. Oh no, that's the okay. All right, so that's what it is. How do you be the first? All right. The difficulty is in that you've never done it before. You don't know what's required. You don't know what the best practices are. You don't know where the best places to set it up are. You don't know what the best features are, right? So that becomes the difficulty overall in being the first one to set up generational wealth in your family. Excuse me. That's where professionals are definitely going to come in, and possibly multiple professionals, possibly. It depends on what you got going on. Okay. Um, we dealt with two very similar people that were looking to get into the investment space, um, and they had very similar portfolios but different structures. So one had like a full-on LLC portfolio in the U.S. And LLCs owned everything. It was a solid portfolio. It was a solid structure, but it was an LLC based structure. And I think the LLC at the top had taken an S corp election because their CPA told them that it was appropriate based on the cash flow at that point. And so they were taking a salary from the S corp, or the LLC that was taxed as an S corp, and then I believe also taking distributions. And now they had assets, which is not generational wealth, and they were moving into this like, okay, I have some assets going on now. I want to get into generational wealth. I want to start pushing in that direction. Blah 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 blah. And so at the same time, we had another client come through, very similar, portfolio in the same type of industry, both of them doing real estate. Um, but the other client had a couple other kind of one-off businesses going at the same time, and it made more sense, or at least their, financial advisor um, had structured their, empire underneath a C corp. So there was a C corp at the top, a one person's structure, and there was a LLC taxed as an S corp on the top of the other person's structure, right? So what ended up happening with those two is that the one who had the S corp tax LLC at the top of their structure, um, everything is essentially separated. And again, this is based on what their tax professional wanted for their overall tax picture. So they're U.S. tax professional anyway. So everything is separated, right? So they have their Airbnbs, and there's a hosting company that is over top of the actual property, and there's a trust that owns the management company. And those layers are all separated. And then there's the businesses that are happening in the United States, and they're all separated. Because that made the most tax sense for that particular person. So every time that person pulls money into the United States, repatriates money back into the United States, or pays themselves from the foreign structure, they're going to have to make a tax filing, right? There are some like monetary limits that maybe they can get away with not doing it under a certain amount of money, but that amount of money doesn't necessarily make sense for this person. So they're going to be paid more than that, and they're going to have to do some tax filings. Right now, the other person, um, their American company owns 10% of their local company. Remember, this is the C corp, right? So the S corp, everything's separated. On the C corp side, and it's a real corporation that's taxed as a C corp. It's not a LLC taxed as a C corp. Not that that necessarily matters, but on their side, the C corp is allowed to get something called a dividends return deduction. Only C corps can get this deduction. So the C corp can utilize the foreign dividends return deduction, which is a different category of the same deduction, and they can deduct 100%, tax deduct 100% of the dividends kicked back to the C corp, right? So now, one client with a very similar setup, similar amount of properties, and similar amount of assets under management on the real estate side and all of that, will pay more taxes on any money repatriated back to the United States, since they're investors, not relocation people. So they're not like moving here, they're just investing here. The money that goes back to the U.S., they'll pay more taxes on than the person who has the C Corp. Now, the C Corp is typically considered to be the more expensive structure, right? So the more expensive structure that has, a higher paperwork burden and all of that when it comes to tax time and all of that, is the one that has the ability to write off 100% of all dividends paid from the company in Kenya to the company in America. And those companies have to be mixed because the American company has to own at least 10% of the company, right? So in their situation, the American company owns even more than that, because since both companies are engaged in the same business, they can use financing from the U.S. company to do whatever they wanted to do with the Kenyan company, because it's a subsidiary, it's owned, but there's a higher threshold of ownership. So their C corp owns more than the 10% that they would need to own in order to get the foreign dividends received deduction. Right now, they need to hold the shares in their Kenyan company for a year, which is different than your domestic dividend received deduction. for that one, I think you only need to hold the shares for like 6 months. So everything had to be strategic. It has to be, that you strategically receive those shares in that company on the first day, of the new year, so that by the next year's tax filings, you meet that 365 days of holding requirement, right? So you can get 100% tax deduction. So it just depends on what your structure is already. Now, if you don't have a structure, that's great. And you can create whatever structure makes the most sense for your goals and your outcome, right? But you still have to deal with a local professional, especially if you plan on investing and staying, right? So our investors typically don't move here. They typically own investments here and they live somewhere else. Or a lot of them are nomads and they live a bunch of other places. But point is, they don't immigrate here. They might expat here, which is temporary. Immigration is permanent, right? So they might expat here for 90 days, six months, something like that, but they don't like move here. Okay, so they're dealing with foreign tax regimes no matter where they're from. If you're American, you're always dealing with the American tax regime, unless you give up your citizenship, which we only recommend in very rare circumstances. So the issue with America is America has 50 countries that operate in the Union, right? They're the United States of America. A state is a country. Only Americans feel like it's not because of the way their system works. But in every other country in the world, the state is the country, right? The Secretary of State of the United States of America represents the country in foreign policies. They're the Secretary of State. They do not represent Pennsylvania, right? So typically around the world, the word state means country. So the states in the United States of America are, if you go back and look, 1776 and all that, and you look at the history of it, they're actually 50 independent nations that came together under a union. All right. So the issue there is American clients need to make sure that their local expert is actually local, right? Like we have clients from PG County in Maryland, right? Prince George's County in Maryland. In that county, there are specific rules about what happens with property deeds, which can matter to clients of ours because a lot of our clients will either take an HEI against a property deed that they own, or they'll do a cash out refinance, a DSCR loan, or something like that, utilizing a piece of property. Or they'll equity strip a property and then throw that property in an LLC, right? If you throw it in the LLC first, it's incredibly difficult to equity strip it later because the requirements for business credit are completely different. So, that being the case, those special county rules about how, title deeds get put into companies and how title deeds get put into trusts are not something that a professional from elsewhere in the state would understand, and definitely not something that a professional just, that works on a federal level, because they do federal taxes. So, I do all 50 states. Well, they say that because they're focused on federal taxes, but that's not necessarily going to help you with your state taxes. And it's not going to help you with any special county or possibly even city rules that may exist for you. So there has to be that local person there that understands the local rules, county and state, not just federal rules. Okay, that's like the number one mistake that people make. They get their federal stuff in order, and they think because they're not in the state anymore, that automatically means they're not a tax resident of the state, and it doesn't. Okay. So the first step is to make sure that you have your experts together. We have clients who are themselves tax attorneys, enrolled agents, and CPAs. But their specialization is in international taxes. And so they still have to go and get a professional member of the team to help them with their international stuff, and they're tax professionals. right? So understand how important it is to get your professionals together, right? If lawyers that come work with us are getting additional professionals, don't think that you can navigate the complexities of international taxes, right, by yourself. You're setting yourself up for failure. Okay? So that's step number one to being the first in your family is to go ahead and get your team together. Or at least identify who needs to be on the team. Okay? Some folks will talk about getting your finances together. That's actually not necessary. To start generational wealth isn't expensive. So it's actually not a huge, it's not in the top 10 at all. Who knows why? Who knows why? If you've followed me long enough, you know why that doesn't matter. No, but good guess. Good guess, though. Yes, because compounding is a function of time, not money, right? The more money you start with, yes, the better off or the faster it's going to compound, but it's not a function of money, it's a function of time. So you could technically compound $1 into $1 million. It's going to take you 300 years, right? But you could technically compound $1 into $1 million if you had the time, right? Most people that doesn't make sense, but mathematically it's true, right? So it's the time that matters and the structure that's protecting what's going on inside of that time that matters, but not necessarily the money. The money adjusts the time until goal. So if you want to make sure your descendants have $1 million to start with, then you would figure out at 6%, compounding interest, how many years is it going to take for me to get to $1 million if I start with $1,000, right? And then you can calculate out, oh, okay, that's going to take me 68 years, or whatever the case may be, and then go from there. That's how compounding works, and that's why money's not even in the top 10, right? Getting your mindset together is way more important than getting your money together as far as being the first person in your family to go ahead and cultivate generational wealth, right? There is a power in being first, though, right? Family legacy starts with one decision maker, and that's it. Just the one. Um, and it's tough for that person because they got to be willing to do things differently. So they're kind of changing the dysfunctional traditions of the family, which I'm sure there are plenty. Um, and they have to acknowledge that they're in unfamiliar territory, that they don't actually know what they're doing, or else it'd be done already, right? Which is where I would say about 90% of the people fail because they don't acknowledge that and they try to do everything that they don't know how to do alone, which doesn't make any sense at all, right? So not having professionals at that critical juncture is going to hurt you big time, right? So get some professionals together, all right? Even if it's like a class, right? I've definitely run into folks that couldn't afford whatever aspect of a professional was available in their local, market. Maybe CPAs are like really expensive in that market, and that typically indicates that there's some kind of local tax thing going on that makes it harder to be a CPA there. But I digress. But I've definitely, run into people who had those kind of issues, and it was cheaper for them to go to the community college and take a class for a semester, right? You don't have to enroll in a degree program, right? And in certain situations, we've had people that do something called auditing the class. So you can sign up to audit a class. That's free. You don't get a grade, right? So like you don't It's not like you get a transcript or anything, or you get a grade for that class, but you get to take it. Just take it for free, right? So we've definitely had people do that where they still went out and got the information they needed from a professional source, not freaking GPT that's going to lie to you, or Reddit that's going to lie to you, or at least not give you specific information because it doesn't know your specific situation. An actual professional source where there's consequences for them lying, right? If you go to college and they lie to you in a college course, there's actually consequences that they could have to pay monetarily for doing that, right? So you need to go to real sources where there's consequences for them not telling the truth, that are monetary consequences, real consequences, right? So that's available. That last one I just talked about is free. So while there are folks who are skilled at creating an excuse for every solution, you can go out there and spend the time and get the information for free from professionals, right? It's just up to how much you want it, whether you want it or not. If you don't want it, it's just not going to happen. And just admit that, I don't want it, and just keep it moving, right? Get the excuse thing out of your head, right? Just, stand 10 toes down and you don't want to improve yourself and keep it moving, all right? You're in the majority. And you're not in the minority. You're in the majority for sure. All right, but that changing your mindset is going to be one of your number one factors. So your team, change in mindset, those two things are going to be in your top three for sure. The understanding why your legacy structures matter is also going to be important. If you don't know why you're doing it, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? There's plenty of firms out there that really, really, really need you to pay them. Okay? Don't allow anyone who's just pushing you to get a payment, or rushing you or anything like that. Take a step back, get a second opinion, right? You want to work with a firm that does not need your payment. Okay? Same thing like with a doctor. You don't want to work with a surgeon who needs you to pay for this surgery. Right? That's not what you want. You want to work with a surgeon who's in an established facility, who makes all the money they need to make, who enjoys the type of medicine that they practice, and they see a problem and they're giving you your options and they think the best option is surgery. Not the person who's like, "Ooh, I need that $10,000. Let me cut this guy's brain open." That's not what you want, right? So you want to make sure that, as you're looking at your professionals and you're dealing with your professionals, that you're working with specialists. Specialists don't do sales. Okay? Specialists do education and then they walk away. Specialists don't need your sale. They're doing what they love. That's who you want to deal with. You want to deal with the specialist. They're going to educate you and then they're going to walk away. And if you want to do business with them, then you'll apply to do business with them. And you may even get turned down, right? Like what happens when you move to a new area and you're calling doctor's offices? You get that response, "Oh, we're not taking new patients right now." Right? And it doesn't matter what you say. "Wait, well, you don't want my money?" We don't need your money. We're not taking new patients right now because we have the max amount of patients that, we decided is our capacity, and we can give each and every one of those patients excellent care. And we're not going to take another one and diminish the overall care of our client base, right? That's what specialists do. That's the difference. You've encountered it before, right? If you're an adult, you've called the doctor's office and they've said to you, "We're not taking new patients right now." Okay? That's what you want when you're dealing with specialists. And even if you want to deal with a specific person and they happen not to be taking, new people right now, then ask for a wait list. Ask to be waitlisted. Right? Say, "Can I get on your waiting list?" They typically always have one, and they will call you back as the waiting list opens, right? If you don't hear from them in 6 months, that's probably a good sign, right? Means they're doing really well. And when they get around to you, you'll be able to benefit from that top tier level of service that they're able to provide, right? But you don't want the pushy person who's trying to get a sale from you. That's what generalists do. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with sales and sales teams or anything like that. But typically, specialists don't engage in the sales rhetoric because they stay with you longer, right? That doctor's office, that might be your doctor's office and your family doctor until everyone in your family or the doctor themselves is dead, right? So they know they're going to be with you for an extended period of time. Most specialists operate that way. For us, we're with people for at least 7 years. Our generational wealth people, it's like the family doctor. We're with them, until one of us is dead, right? And so because of that, the sales thing isn't conducive to us, right? If we were Best Buy and we're going to sell you a cell phone case and you're going to walk away and we'll never see you again, fine. We can have some pushy salesman, getting over your objections and twisting and manipulating and all of that nonsense. But that doesn't work when you're going to be with the person forever, right? Then it's not conducive to the overall relationship, because what ends up happening if you're in a relationship with somebody who manipulated you, right? Or you're in a relationship with somebody who maybe even lied to you up front, and then it's an ongoing relationship. What happens, right? Resentment builds, right? There's buyer's remorse. There's all this crazy stuff that happens, and you're face to face in this bad relationship. Now it's like a toxic relationship. It's just not conducive to future business, right? So your specialists typically are not going to do that. If you come up with an objection, a specialist will not try to change your mind. They'll be like, okay, that's it, next, right? Because typically a specialist is very close to their wait list, right? Very, very, very close to their wait list. So they typically only have a couple slots anyway, right? And if you're hesitating, what they're seeing is, all right, I'm with this person for the next 7 years. Every single time we discuss a solution, they have a hesitation, right? Not a question. That's different, right? Every single time we discuss a solution, they find a problem, right? They complicate the solution, okay? Even though they don't know what they're doing. That's why they're talking to me, right? That's the other difference between specialists and generalists. When you're dealing with a generalist, sometimes you actually know what's going on. When you're dealing with a specialist, by definition, you don't. When you go to the doctor, you don't know what's wrong. You might think you know what's wrong, but you don't know until the tests are done, right? So by definition, when you're dealing with a specialist, you're paying someone to tell you what to do because you don't know. Same thing as going to college. You go to college, you can't tell the college professor, I pay your salary, I'm paying for this, you work for me. It doesn't work that way. You're specifically paying a specialist to give you something you don't have. So they're in charge of that. That's how specialists work, right? Can't go to the brain surgeon and be like, yeah, there's an itching back here, so get out your number 10 scalpel. I need you to cut my head open and get into surgery. I'm paying you, right? I don't want to hear any questions about it. I'm the boss. To cut my head open. Doesn't work that way. They're a specialist. They're going to tell you when you need your head cut open, and you're going to pay them for it, right? That's how specialists work. And you know that already. You've been to the doctor before, right? You understand that this is how it works. So you want to make sure that that's who you're dealing with. You're not dealing with like a generalist who's going to push you in directions that you don't understand. You want to make sure you're dealing with somebody who's going to educate you. Same thing with the doctor's office. They're going to explain to you exactly what's wrong. They're going to break down the test, and they're going to show you the results of the test. They're going to show you your elevated levels, your this, your that, your whatever. They're going to explain to you what that means, and they're going to give you the 3 options. You can have chemo, you can have surgery, or we can, make you comfortable until the end. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is. And you feel free to go get a second opinion. When you say, I'm going to go get a second opinion, the doctor's like, oh my God, don't go see another doctor. That doesn't happen. Or, well, what'll happen if you speak to your wife? Tell me, what happens if they say no? Are you going to let that? All that objection overcoming stuff doesn't work with specialists. You want to go talk to somebody else? Go talk to them. Period. That's the end of the conversation. You need to ask your wife? Go ask them. That's the end of the conversation. There are no overcoming objections when you're dealing with specialists, right? So you want to make sure that that's where you are in a legal move like this, and in a generational move like this. You don't want it to be like an insurance salesman who's selling, a trust or something like that. You don't want that. And if that's, what you're feeling from the conversations, just go get another opinion. All right. And if they push back on you getting another opinion, absolute red flag. Okay. Big thing for first timers. When you're the first person breaking that cycle and creating generational wealth, you don't know what to expect. A lot of you don't even know that there are business specialists and business generalists. You're not engaged in business in that way to know that there is a difference. Once I start comparing it to your experiences with your doctor and your dentist, then you're like, oh, I do know that. Yeah, okay. I never thought of it that way. So you do know. It's just that if you're an employee, you don't engage, in business from a business owner standpoint or from an industry standpoint, you don't realize that there's a continuum in business ownership, and that there are generalists and that there are specialists, and one isn't better than the other. They just do different things, right? And they typically, command different pricing structures, right? So, and there are different outcomes, right? If you're a price buyer and the only thing in the world that matters to you is the cost, you're always going to use a generalist, even when you need a specialist, and you're always going to complain about everything you buy. You know these people. They buy things, they go back and buy again and again and again with the same people and complain about them every time. Oh, I hate their service, I hate their quality, but they got 20 of them. Why do you keep buying from them? Because they're the cheapest. Well, you're getting what you pay for. You're a price buyer. The only thing that matters to you is price. You can complain until you're blue in the face, but you keep going back and dealing with the low quality BS because you're a price buyer, right? That's fine. The generalists, they exist to serve you, right? And they are, and it's okay. Then there are also value buyers. Now, value buyers, they're looking for something that has a high value level, that lasts longer, that maybe it has a more concierge feel, maybe it's boutique, right? And so they're not as focused on price. That is not the only and most important thing to them, right? Doesn't mean that they're just going to buy the most expensive thing either. It has to have value. And then there are splurgers who do just buy the most expensive thing, right? And sometimes they're rich, sometimes they're pretending to be rich, right? But there are people who just look at the highest price tag and that's what they choose, without even knowing what it includes. So there are different types of buyers, there are different types of business models, there are different types of sellers, there are different types of industrialists. And so for this situation, the best practice is for you to get a specialist. Okay? So for you to get a specialist and for you to be a value buyer, not a splurger, because the most expensive specialist isn't necessarily the best, but definitely not a price buyer where the only thing you care about is the lowest, price tag. You're going to screw yourself up with that. So you want to be a value buyer by mindset, and you want to be dealing with specialists. So you run into these people and they can do everything. Oh, we're a one-stop shop. We can do everything. That's a red flag. For this type of thing, that's a red flag. If it's a quinceañera, that's great. You found a one-stop shop. No problem. But for this type of thing, where you're dealing with legality, where you're dealing with decisions that are going to be decades-long decisions, one-stop shop is a red flag. Okay, you should be getting multiple specialists in multiple different disciplines that can make sure that you get everything that you need exactly the right way. And they're all going to work really, really well with each other. Typically, specialists are A players. So when you got a team of A players, they're all going to work super well together and super efficiently together, right? So you want to make sure that you're not one-stop shopping it, because one-stop shopping is they're gonna miss things because they're not specialists. Specialists, you got a team of specialists, they'll find new ways to do things on the fly. They'll feed off of the specialization of each other and they'll go back and forth, making sure that they fine tune all the details on all your structures and everything like that. And they'll end up creating new structures, more powerful structures that never even existed before, just because everyone's a specialist. How do you create a structure that's never existed? I've told you guys multiple times, trusts and family constitutions are the most flexible civil and legal documents in the world. Period. You can do anything with the trust, even something illegal. But if you do something illegal, the judge is going to invalidate the trust once that goes to court. But until it goes to court, right, even something illegal you can write into the trust. That's why you need professional guidance, because you might think the thing that you're doing isn't illegal, right? Because illegal and criminal are two different things, by the way, right? So it doesn't have to be criminal. It could just be illegal, right? And so you might not know it's illegal because you didn't employ professionals. No one caught that the thing that you're mentioning is illegal, right? And then until somebody challenges it, it keeps operating that way. What's the difference between criminal and criminal is a crime, all right? The crimes are set by the law and set by the state, right? So if you do something criminal, you have committed a crime against the state typically, right? When you commit what colloquially people might consider a crime against a person, it's typically not actually a crime. It's typically that you stepped on the rights of a person, right? That's civil liability. It's not criminal, right? But there might be a law on the books about it, so you can go to civil court and be found liable, not guilty, right? But it's still illegal, right? You've been found liable in civil liability, right? So for example, an example of that would be there was a person who did a trust with us in a jurisdiction where a challenge clause would have been illegal, right? So what's a challenge clause? A challenge clause is a clause that says if you challenge this trust, you're immediately removed as a beneficiary, right? So as soon as you challenge the trust, you're no longer a beneficiary, you're kicked out. And it keeps people from fighting to try and change things in the trust. Now that's legal in most places. But in this specific locality where this person was homesteaded, right, the specific jurisdiction where they directly lived and where most of their kids and grandkids lived, there was essentially a law that says that you can't keep people from bringing legal claims. And so if you had this, section in your trust that said, hey, if you try to bring a claim, you're automatically kicked out of the trust, you were actually infringing on their right in that jurisdiction to be able to challenge things and to be able to bring legal claims, right? So the local professional, we don't know everybody's little minor jurisdiction, you know what I mean? So the local professional was the one who caught that, right? And then we created a whole new way to write that clause into the trust that didn't violate that local, law in that local jurisdiction, but still ended up giving us the same effect in the end, right? That was something that had never existed before, right? Other trust attorneys and stuff like that, and trust professionals and whatnot had never written the trust that way before. So because that person had A players, they had local A players, they had us on the international side, they had an enrolled agent who was an A player, and all of that. Because of that, all of the A players were able to come together and brainstorm and figure out a way to make that work, right? So it wasn't criminal. No one was going to jail for that, right? But it was illegal. So illegality and criminality are different things, okay? Well, yeah, that's why the professionals matter so much, because most of the nuance of all of this stuff are things that you've never thought about, especially if you're first in your family. There's just things that you've never thought about. There are things that your professional, if they're a specialist, should be bringing up to you. If they're a generalist, they're going to do whatever you say. That's the number one way to figure out, to your question, how do you know the difference? It's not credentials. It's not, oh, you went to Harvard, so you're a specialist. That's not the way it works. It's the way that they operate. So if you, for example, if you go to college and you tell the professor, hey, I pay for this. I'm the boss here. I'm the one spending the money here. Give me an A. And the college professor's like, oh, okay, here's an A, right? He's a generalist. Now, you're normally not going to run into that, right? You know, they're going to tell you go to admissions and get your money back, right? Whatever. But if they just give you what you want because you're paying them, they're a generalist, which means that you're not getting any protection whatsoever. Because if you knew what you had to do, you wouldn't need them at all. That's the catch-22 of even dealing with the generalist, right? And the only reason why they sometimes slip through the cracks is because you don't know, so you think that's the way it goes. A specialist is not just going to do whatever you say. A specialist is going to let you know when what you say is illegal, when what you say doesn't actually work structurally, when what you say creates a opening and a gap in your structure and foundation that would allow somebody to attack you legally. Because you can bust the trust if it's not written well. If a trust isn't written well and it doesn't have the proper clauses, another lawyer can break that trust open easily, right? And so it just depends on the jurisdiction where the trust is and the criteria that should be in place for that trust in that jurisdiction, right? So our generational wealth trust, they're in this jurisdiction, and so we got that part of it down. But we've seen jurisdictions, like for example, in the United States, there are jurisdictions that require bookkeeping standards for trusts. So if there's no article in the trust deed that clearly delineates the bookkeeping method, you can literally break that trust open because it doesn't meet an equivalency standard with the state. Right now, that wouldn't matter to our trust because of the jurisdiction we're in. But these are the types of things that your specialist is going to stop you on, even if you want a thing that they can't put it in there. Another example, we had somebody that was doing a bloodline clause. And a bloodline clause is essentially, I'm the person who started the trust, and anyone who's ever going to be a beneficiary of this trust has to be related to me by blood, right? So now it creates a DNA test type of clause at birth for all the descendants. And that DNA test has to link back to whoever the patriarch or matriarch, or possibly both, in order for that person to be eligible to be part of that particular trust. That means adopted kids are not eligible, right? Well, the inheritance rules in the place where this person lived stated that you cannot invalidate the claim of any legal child, right? Not the claim of your birth children, but any legal child, which means that the bloodline clause could be seen to violate that, and then an adopted kid could then sue the trust for violating the law as they are a legal child, and now their inheritance, is being withheld from them, et cetera, right? So again, that was caught by the local specialists, and then because there was a team of specialists on it, that team of specialists was able to create language or create mechanisms by which they could bring that clause into legality with the local jurisdiction, right? So that's how specialists work. So in that moment, the specialist is like, no, you can't have that, right? Or even though you're paying, even though that's what you want, no, you can't have it because it's illegal, and you're going to jeopardize your entire trust when somebody sues you for putting that in there, right? The government's not going to stop you because it's not criminal. You can write it in there. Government's not going to stop you when you register the trust. You can have all the illegal stuff you want up in there. They're still going to stamp it and be like, yep, there you go. Because they don't have standing. Even if you know that something is wrong, if it doesn't affect you, you don't have the legal standing to bring a case about it. right? So you can go write it and have it all. A lot of people take that as validation. Well, I wrote the trust myself, took it down to the county, and they stamped it. That doesn't validate what's in the trust. Right now, you're in a worse position because now you have an illegal document on record. And the first lawyer who realizes there's a little bit of money in that trust is going to be able to crack it wide open and take everything you got. So, professionals, mindset. Professionals, mindset. Those are the top two. Then structure, figuring out what structure makes the most sense for you. That comes in probably right around number 3, right? We like offshore. Why do we like offshore? Because our offshore judges flip your local judges the bird. That's why, right? If you have a trust that's local, the judge can break that trust at a whim, right? They can even break that trust illegally, and then you would have to, appeal the decision, and then maybe it's overturned on appeal because maybe they didn't actually have the right to break that trust. But that's 5 years down the road, and $100,000 later, right? And so by having offshore trusts, as long as they're set up correctly, if a local judge makes a ruling that affects your offshore trust, the offshore judges will flip them the bird if you choose the right jurisdiction. Everything is strategic, right? So you can't just pick any old country. There are countries that will acquiesce to your home jurisdiction. There are countries that have treaties in place where they'll bend the knee to your home jurisdiction. So you need to make sure that, again, the specialist is looking at where you're coming from, or at least where you live at, and making sure that there are no treaties that would allow those people to, stick their hands in foreign bank accounts or force anything in a foreign trust. So what ends up happening internationally is they would need a judgment in that country, right? And then the rules on how foreign, judgment filings work become super important. In some places, they can bring a foreign judgment and register it with the local courts, and then get the local courts to, go ahead and enforce that judgment. In other places, we have a standing issue. Have the laws in this country been violated? No, then you have no standing to bring a case here. In certain jurisdictions, they even make you put up $1 million just to bring an action. Oh, you want to file an action here? Put $1 million in a bond with the government first. No $1 million in a bond with the government first. You're not a citizen, and you're using up our judicial system. You haven't paid taxes here. You have the right to use our judicial system. F off. Right? That's the power of offshore trusts. So that's why we use offshore structures. But that doesn't mean that an offshore structure is right for everyone. Right? That's not what it means. Right? So, for example, we don't like putting real property, okay, or real estate in offshore structures. Why? Because the physical asset is still in someone else's jurisdiction. And we've seen judges get the shits of it and just seize the house illegally, right? But okay, so it's illegal. So what do we do about it? Well, now the owner, who is the trust, so now the trustee who's been keeping all your stuff safe overseas has to show up now and deal with this illegality and make a motion, to another court or even the same court to release this illegally seized property. But now what? Now the trustee is in the jurisdiction. They're no longer overseas. They can be held by the court. They can be compelled by the court because now they're in the jurisdiction. So there are judges who will play that kind of game. They'll break the law in order to try and break the trust because their ego has been bruised, that their rulings don't mean anything anymore, right? So we don't like putting real property inside offshore trusts, right? If we need the offshore trust to control the real property, we prefer to have that real property inside a local LLC and have that LLC be owned by the offshore trust, right? But so it's not just, okay, offshore trusts have all of this incredible protection, so everything should be an offshore trust. Anybody who's approaching this as everybody needs this, everything should be this is the right answer. They're full of shit. Everyone's answer is different. That's why I gave you that example in the beginning of two people doing exactly the same thing. One person's tax attorney is like, nope, you don't need to own any of it. Keep it all separate because of the way that we're filing taxes here in the United States as it is. The other one's tax attorney was like, yep, get a C corp, own 10% or more of that foreign entity, and get all the dividends flowing into the C corp, 100% tax exemption. Both were valid. They just have different situations, right? So anyone who's trying to tell you this one answer is the answer to everything, this is what everybody should be doing, this is what all the rich people do. No, all of their structures are completely different. All of their family constitutions are completely different. All of their waterfalls are completely different, right? All of their investments are completely different. There is no this is what the rich do. That's all salesman bullshit. All right, so I need you guys to use just a little bit of logic in the sense of if there was just one thing that you could do, everybody with a little bit of money be doing it. If that one thing made you the billionaire, if that one thing gave you the generational wealth, everybody on the planet would be doing that one thing. It's not the way it works. You have to get the series of things that work for your specific circumstance. And then beyond that, you cannot lie. It's ridiculous how many people lie to their specialists and then screw themselves up and then run into a situation where nothing is working the way that they wanted it to work. Everything is falling apart. Possibly even agencies are now hunting them down like the IRS. And then they come back and they're like, why is this happening? And upon, investigation, we realize they lied about half the stuff that they brought up to their own specialists. You typically have some sort of privilege in place, especially with us. You have attorney-client privilege in place, but you typically have some sort of privilege in place. Once you get started, it's ridiculously foolish to lie to your specialist because now they're making decisions based on things that don't even apply to you. I don't know why people do it, but they do it. So don't, right? Make sure if you need to know what kind of privilege is in place, ask. And if they say, oh, there's no privilege in place, okay, well then speak to a higher, level of specialist. But make sure if you need to know, then ask and get that all sorted out. And then once that's sorted out, tell your specialist the damn truth. Or else you're going to have a problem. Don't be in there trying to pretend you're rich or show off or any of that nonsense. You're going to mess yourself up. Tell your specialist the truth and then proceed from there. All right, any questions on any of that so far? I put it where the goats can get it. I don't typically sugarcoat much of anything. There's no upside to doing that, right? Let's see. Yes. All right. Any questions on any of that? What is this? All right. Looks like we're all good on that. No questions on that. I can move on. All right. So the mindset, there are plenty of different mindsets, but you also want to change your physical habits. You want to identify which ones have been working against you. Okay? You want to break any of the secular nonsense that you inherited from the family that wasn't passing on generational worth, that might have been passing on generational curses, right? But you want to figure out what formal structures need to be inherited from you moving forward that will maintain generational wealth mindset and structures in your family for perpetuity. Perpetuity means forever. All right? So moving forward, you want to make sure that you identify formal structures, right? Typically, those are educational. Typically, they're educational. But you want to make sure that that's in place and that you move forward with that. What's that say? No. So your family trust should be a roadmap for your family's future. Now, the family constitution will spell that roadmap out. It'll turn it into a manual, right? But it shouldn't just be about passing down, hey, safe space. Shouldn't just be about passing down assets, right? That if you're stuck on the money, you're doing yourself a disservice because the money is the easiest part. So you're doing yourself a disservice, and to a certain extent, you might be being lazy, right? Because the money is the easiest part. Money you can literally set and forget. You can literally throw $1,000 in a generational wealth trust and walk away from it forever, and let it compound in that trust. And in 60 years, that $1,000 could be nearly $1,000,000. That didn't take anything, but you also didn't do the hard part. So now, when your heirs and your descendants get that $1,000,000, they blow it in one night at Vegas because you didn't teach them financial literacy. You didn't give them the education. You didn't give them the formal structures. You didn't give them the mindset. You didn't give them any of that. So now it just doesn't even matter, right? Because all you did was you focused on the, the easy part instead of the hard part. All right. So you want to make sure that your focus is not cash. And when you're broke, it's really, really easy to focus on cash. When you don't have a lot of money, it's really easy for you to focus on the cash part because these structures are structures that have been historically discussed as things that incredibly wealthy people do, but they didn't start wealthy. Right? Generational wealth trusts are designed for non-wealthy people who are making the move to make sure the next generation has some wealth. Typically, they don't even have a financial benefit on the person who started them. Right? The tree takes so long to grow that they planted the tree, but they never got to sit in the shade of it. It's the next generation, and sometimes the generation after that, depending on how small the initial investment was, that gets the benefit from it. So, in order to make sure that you can maintain those structures, there's a ton of mindset that has to be worked on. There's a ton of discipline that has to be worked on, and it's like a daily thing. Right? Now, by engaging in that, even though financially you may not benefit from the generational wealth plan, are you going to benefit from it mentally, or are other parts of your life going to benefit from you now being disciplined? Of course they are. Of course they are. Are your business ventures going to start doing better? Of course they are. All right. Your understanding of how compounding works and how investment works, and your understanding of long-term planning and being around those specialists that you've hired to assist you, is that going to improve your corporate game and your business game? Of course it is. Right? So you're literally forging yourself into a better person. And at the end of the day, that better person is going to deserve to be the patriarch or matriarch of that new family that you've just built. That's going to last forever. All right. So all of the things, come together, and it's all holistic. But if money is your focus, then you're focused in the wrong direction. All right. Yeah, it's a ripple effect. Well, you're also going to shift your mindset from short term to long term. You have to. There's no other way around it, right? Because you're already talking about 100-year structures. You're already talking about, generational wealth that lasts literally forever, right? As long as everybody has the right stewardship to keep it going. And that stewardship, that's your hard part. That's what you got to teach to make sure that it goes from generation to generation to generation. And the majority of people do not teach it. We're not talking about the majority of plebeians, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the majority of people who got it together enough to even start generational wealth. So we're talking about the majority of your peers. Mm. All right? So we're talking about the majority of your peers. We are not talking about the global majority who don't even take the step. They don't even care enough about family or their children, or any of that to even take the first step. We're not talking about them. We never talk about them. We're talking about the people who actually got together enough, actually love their family enough, actually love their kids enough to even take the first step. 75% of them don't succeed past the first generation. They succeed because they want this thing to happen for their family and for their kids, but they forgot to give their kids the education. They forgot to give their kids the habitus. We were talking about the habitus yesterday, right? They didn't give their kids the habitus. Their kids didn't end up with the dispositions that you get from habitus. And so once it was their turn, it all fell apart. Right? So that is the hard part. That's the part that you got to master. That's the work that you have to do. Ooh, we got to do work. You don't want to do work. Keep it moving. You got to do the work, and it's on you. There's no excuses. Uh-oh. Is that accountability? Uh-oh. And that's why only 25% of the probably 10% of people who do it, only 25% of them make it to the second generation. Because 75% of them do not pass on the education. They only pass on money. They do the easiest part and run away from the hardest part. That's correct. It's the exact same reason why most lottery winners are broke in 3 years. Got it? Any questions on that? Any questions on that? How do you shift to a long-term practice? Practice. You have to force yourself to see things in a long-term mindset, and the more you force yourself to see things long-term, the easier it gets to see things long-term. And then eventually you see everything long-term. That's essentially how that works. It's all practice. That's why it's like a daily discipline. Yeah, I'll give you an example. Somebody had jumped on to a live where I guess we were talking about business or something. I don't even remember what the topic of the live was. But somebody came up to speak to me. And they were talking about how in their town, the north side is, not black and the south side is black. And there's a bridge that you have to take to cross a river to get to the south side. And they were going to put a toll on the bridge that takes you to the south side, but no toll on, the north side. And so in order to go do business with black-owned businesses, you would have to pay this toll, and nobody's going to pay it. So they essentially rerouted all business to these non-black areas where there weren't even any businesses before, right? It just so happened that in this particular town, the black district was also the business district. So according to this, person who was telling the story, the government literally got grant money together and changed the district by making it a toll to get into that black area, which is also going to affect the standard black residents that are just going home, not even the people who are going to the business district, and making it free to go to the white business area, right? And so this was where the focus was with the person who was talking. Immediately for us, and it was down south somewhere. So immediately for us, we were like, well, wait a minute. Are there any casinos there? Is gambling legal? In the, what's going on there? Oh, yeah. There were 3 casino licensing. 2 of them were on our side. 1 of them is on the other side. Okay, cool. 1 of them is closed down, but they still got the license. All right. Are you going to create a ferry riverboat casino that ferries people in cars from one side to the other side, but has a restaurant, has a gambling center, all of that on the boat, and make that into a big attraction? You already got the license. You don't need to go get a state license. Just reopen the casino as a riverboat. Oh, we hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Right now, we're not even there. We just think different. Right? They were defeated for months in town hall meetings and all of that because of this road that the state is building. And 2 minutes of talking to somebody who has a different mentality, and all of a sudden, and there was 5 or 6 other solutions that came out of that conversation. But because the mindset is different, right? Because excuses are not focused on, and only solutions are focused on. Immediately, there were different solutions from the exact same data set that presented themselves, right? That's why dynastatic families do better than other families. Their social network is the tiniest bit of their social capital, right? The tiniest bit. It's their mentality and the way they see the world, and the confidence they bring to that is the major difference between how they proceed with changes and adjustments in life, and how the standard person, proceeds with adjustments and changes in life. So that's really it, is to train that over time with discipline and be able to see where the solutions are, and then execute on those solutions. So it's 100% anti-laziness. You just can't be lazy and still do it. It's too much work. It's a lot of work. But you have to essentially embrace it and enjoy it. If you can get to the point where you enjoy the work, then that's where everything takes off. And it's easier for every generation thereafter, because they inherit the dispositions, not just the money. They inherit the literacy, not just the money. They inherit the education, not just the money. Right? So that makes it just a norm for every additional generation. Unless your first generation is already grown or so old that they can remember, then they might have some difficulty too converting. But the first generation born into it, as long as you're not leaning into nepotism and you're actually making it mandatory, which you can do in the trust deed, making it mandatory that they actually go through the educational steps, and making sure that there are hands-on steps, that it's not all just academic education, but also tactile education, right? And as long as you set that up, and you would know how to set that up because your professionals would walk you through that and explain why it's necessary. As long as you set that up, you're good to go. then even when there's a black sheep who does not follow the family constitution, they still have better tools than the average person, and they can still. Paris Hilton's a perfect example. She violated the family constitution, and whatever that family constitution said, as far as conflict resolution was concerned, and as far as punishment and all that was concerned, she was punished under the family rules. She was cut out of everything by her grandfather Conrad. So she didn't get the benefit of the trust. She didn't get the benefit of any of that, right? But she still inherited the academic dispositions, the habitus of the family, and the confidence to believe that she could accomplish whatever she wanted to accomplish, and that's exactly what she did. So even when you have a rebel in the family, that rebel still has more tools at their disposal, just from the cultural currency that they've inherited, than your standard person kind of bumbling through life. All right. Any questions on that? What is cultural currency? Well, it's also called cultural capital, right? And so it's one of the forms of capital that is passed down through generational wealth. If I'm going to try to answer you in a word, you could call it family values as a very high level overview when you're just starting to learn about it. It's quite a bit deeper than that, but so that you get a kind of feel for it in this live, you can call it family values. But they're disciplined, formal values. They're very intentional, and they're backed by like social science. So they're not guesses, right? They're things that are passed down that the families know will have a benefit as a scientific fact. But you can think about it as family values just to kind of get the right direction going in your head. mm, that's more social capital, right? So like networks and stuff, yes, those are inherited as well. Um, they have diminishing returns though, right? Because your father's network, when you really really need them, might be gone, right? So like if your father has passed, there's a decent chance that his network has passed, right? So those networks have diminishing returns. So what you do is you use institutions, right? That's why there are legacies. That's why there are like legacies in Harvard, legacies in Stanford. So that's social capital ends up building new networks every generation, and then the way that you kind of maintain that the network is on the right level is by having these kind of legacy situations with like these Ivy Leagues and stuff like that, so that you know that you can throw your heirs into this situation, and they can pledge this fraternity, or they can join this group, or they can whatever, and then through that build the social capital that's necessary. Black community used to do it as well. things like Jack and Jill. If you're from like an actual like black area, you should know what Jack and Jill is. Eastern Stars and all that stuff. There are all these like little social clubs, Elks, Does, so on and so forth. That created that kind of social capital, and then it was a place you could go back to, the next generation could go back to and build the same social network side of social capital. That's not all of social capital, but that's the part that diminishes with each generation if you don't have some place to put them where they can restart that social networking. Yeah, intentional. I love usefulness. It's never directed it properly. It'll come together. Just you fail your way towards it. It'll come together. You were trying to what? Look at what you wrote in. I'm not sure what you're saying. Oh, is that supposed to be habitus? All right. It's Habitus. Yeah, you can look it up. Sorry about that. You're trying to keep notes, huh? Habitus. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I got you. Yeah, you can definitely look it up. Read into it. Yes, but the empowerment is a result of structure, right? So the empowerment is not a result of the inheritance. The empowerment is a result of structure, and part of that structure is actually habitus. Yeah, it's the more important capitals. So there's obviously economic capital, but the social capital and the cultural capital are more important. Cultural capital is going to be traded within the family for the most part. Social capital is going to be traded outside of the family for the most part. Right, 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 right. Yeah. Just have to start with the right foundation. Now you can go directly into, and we have a lot of clients that do this. You can go directly into your trust deed and start with the trust foundation, which is okay, but it's definitely more powerful if you have a family constitution first. And the family constitution makes it really, really easy to write the trust deed. Depends on the family. I mean, there's no set answer for how long it takes to generate a family constitution. It depends on the family. But typically, like, uh, I'd say like a week. But we cut that week up, so it ends up being 6 weeks, but it's 6 week like weekend sessions type of thing. So if we did it all in one shot, which there have been families who like paid us to actually like fly out and do it all in one shot, then you're talking about like a week. Kind of like corporate training. You fly out corporate trainers, you sit there and have 8 hours of corporate training a day for one work week, and then you come out of it with whatever. It's kind of the same type of thing. You could do it in 1 week. Yeah, you could do it faster if you didn't care about the outcomes. right? Because you have to have a red team session as well, that which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with them. That's a specialist session, but you can have everything set up, and then you need your specialist to try and tear it apart. So you got to have a red team session as well, and then come back at the end with a red team report and be like, all right, this is what you set up. This is how we put it in place and how we agreed on everything. This is what the red team came up with and how they would attack your structure, if they if that's what they were looking to do. And so this is how we close those gaps that are set up in your structure. And then you go back in. It takes about a day to close up whatever they feel like needs to be closed up. And sometimes there's things that they want left open, and leave those avenues of attack open, and then go from there. So you can do it faster if you want. You can do it in an hour, I guess, if you want. It would be a really shitty document, but you could do it faster if you'd like. Value mindset, remember? Value. If you don't have a value mindset, then you start thinking about things like that. Let me cut corners and do it faster versus let me get the greatest value out of this that I can possibly get. Takes time. It's a habit. All right. Any other questions on any of that? Any questions on how to be the first? The cycle breaker. The first person to set up your family that's going to last for generations. Yeah, I know. I don't even. I'm not sick. I don't have a fever or any of that. I just have this weird frog in my throat. I heard you guys are having some flu stuff in the U.S., huh? Maybe it's made its way here. This is a tourist area, so a lot of people from everywhere showing up. hmm Yeah, no, that's true. Any other questions? If you're typing something now, just go ahead and press enter. I'll let you come back and correct it or whatever. If you're about to type something, go ahead and throw a 1 in the chat and I'll wait for you. All right, looks like we're good. Looks like no one has any questions. All right, so I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Same place, same time. All right, Freedom Family. Uh, yeah, actually, there is still one plot left. Yeah, so you can still get the end of year special. There is one end of year special left. Yep. We may get that. We may get that. So we'll see. If we do, we'll definitely start announcing it and all that. We have it, and the background is fine. We're just seeing if we can get it transferred in time. And the government's not back in session yet. So. Still on holiday break. Yeah. So we'll see. If that happens, we'll have 8. We'll have 8 more plots. So that'll be great. All right. Any other questions? All right. looks like we're good to go. All right, guys. Tomorrow, same time, same place. See you later, Freedom Family. Have fun, guys.